All right, we'll give the folks a couple of minutes to join and then we'll start. Give them a few more minutes and start it. All right, let's get started. First, let me welcome all of you to the first episode of Masterclass on application security for O level, hosted by Outsystems User Group Mumbai. This is going to be a 10 or 11 part series that we're going to do on application security in OutSystems and how do we build good, secure applications that can actually serve the customer or the business without compromising on data security, without compromising on the security requirements of the business and the organization. So, during the course of these masterclass, we will explore various different areas of application security at the platform level, the code patterns, the best practices, and what are the other tools and techniques that we have available within the OutSystems O11 environment to build secure applications as required for the business. All right. We'll try and keep this as interactive as possible. During the course of these masterclasses, the idea is to have to distill data from what is already available on the OutSystems resources. So the online resources available in the online trainings, the documentation, other user group events, forums, and so on and so forth, and sort of give a summarized, distilled information packet for you. So all of these presentations will be shared. These video recordings will be shared, and in every session, at the end, we will have a list of the resources that were used to put this deck together, so that you guys can go in and dig deeper and build on what we are discussing during the masterclass session. Um, we will also be sharing at the end uh, the contact information for you guys to join the user group if you have not already. We have a WhatsApp group as well, and we'll share our contact information as well, so that you can keep giving us inputs in terms of how you would like to evolve the masterclass and what you would like to see more of or less of in the next episodes going forward. So having said that, let's start this masterclass process, and welcome all once again to episode 1 of application security. All right. So what is what we expect to achieve in this masterclass series, like I said, is an overview of our security fundamentals. What are the basic principles of having a secure application? How do we protect against? What are the strategies that we can use to protect against the OS8, OWASP vulnerabilities, the top 10 vulnerabilities that they have, and the other vulnerabilities identified for low code, no code platforms as well. How do we have good authentication methods, internal, external authentication? How do we have secure session cookies? How do we ensure authentication flow protection? How do we handle access control, role based and otherwise? How do we handle sensitive data? What are the security logging features available in the platform by default? What additional logging practices can we do to improve the overall security and response for a security incident? What are all the external components that can be used to make our OutSystems platform or OutSystems applications more secure? How do we properly configure our security settings within the platform, within the application? And how do we avoid or protect against cross-site scripting injection and so on and so forth? So just an overview of what all we look at. Um, we do also intend to have guest speakers and even volunteers from participants within the group who would want to come and share case studies, and we'll send out a mailer for the same. So if you want to share a case study that you worked on, that you've done to protect against certain vulnerabilities, we'll be open to have that shared with the group. So now, what is to build a secure application? We need to start somewhere. We need to figure out what are the best practices from the industry standpoint. Now, the Open Web Application Security Project, or it's a non-profit organization that uh, defines the best practices of enhancing web application security. It also has many contributions like the OWASP Top 10. It's a regularly updated list that updates the key vulnerabilities for web applications and other mobile applications. And this is sort of the yardstick, this is the guidelines that we try to identify and see how do we protect against these vulnerabilities that have been identified, and also look at the best practices that are driven from the same. Guys, feel free to put your questions in the chat. as we go along. Every now and then I'll take a pause, go through the questions. If I can answer them, we'll answer them. If this is something that will need more deep dive, then we will send out a communication with the answers to all of these questions as well, which are raised during the chat. All right. Now, you can find this documentation on the OutSystems platform as well. In the documentation section, you will find the top 10 vulnerabilities identified by OWASP is broken access control. So basically, where you don't have good access control measures in place. Cryptographic failures, where you do not have proper encryption, either for data at rest or data in transit. Injection vulnerabilities for things like SQL injection, insecure design, when the application is designed with some security flaws, uh, security misconfiguration, old outdated components with vulnerabilities that are utilized as a part of that are identified and used in code in the platform or in external extensions. Identification and authentication failures for users, the data integrity failures, logging, security logging and monitoring failures, and your server-side request forgery or spoofing vulnerabilities as well. Now, what we're going to look at today in today's session is we're going to look at how do we protect against insecure design from an access control point of view and a broken access control point of view, right? So within the OutSystems environment, within the OutSystems platform, we've got a bunch of tools that can be used to build secure applications. One is role-based access control. So OutSystem gives you the ability to create specific roles, custom roles, and use those roles to provide authorization to users only with a certain role to access certain parts of the application or even access certain applications. Role-based access control is at the cornerstone of building a secure application. And that's something that we'll be going into a lot deeper in today's session. Um, in addition to that, data protection within the platform. So OutSystem uses SSL and TLS for secure data transmission. You can force HTTPS in the platform. You have availability for database encryption services for your encryption of data at rest, at the cloud, at the environment level, to protect sensitive data. And then there are also many third-party tools and utilities within the Forge environment which can be used for data masking and data encryption. Most of us also probably know about the crypt toolbox that's available in Forge, which can also be used for encrypting and storing data within the platform. Code security, in terms of there are best practices for secure code patterns. There are built-in server logic and client-side logic which allow you to sanitize as well as ensure that there is no injection of data possible within your queries, within your advanced SQL queries, and so on and so forth. And of course, logging and monitoring. OutSystems has its logs for various different security aspects, which allow you to identify when there was a possible attack or a breach. There's built-in DDoS attack protections that most of us are familiar with. So these are some of the tools that are available within OutSystems to help build secure applications for the business and for the customers. Now, today we're going to deep dive more into role-based access control. Now, user roles and user role-based authorization in O11 is fairly robust. By default, there are two roles which are available in OutSystems in O11, which is an anonymous role and a registered role. Now, an anonymous role means essentially you do not need a user login. You do not need a role to be assigned. It's an open to all. It's a public site. It's a public app where there is no login required. Ideally, this is something that we avoid, but there could be certain pages which need to be anonymous, like terms and conditions pages or certain static pages where we need information to be made accessible to our customers, FAQ list, and so on and so forth. But ideally, we want to ensure that there is no anonymous screen. We want to try and avoid anonymous access of roles. Um, we There's also a standard role which is registered role. Now, registered role is basically assigned by default to every OutSystems user account created. So every end user account created automatically gets assigned a registered role, and there is you cannot revoke or grant access to that registered role. That's there by default. Right? Now, what you can do is build on these roles and create custom roles. You can create custom roles depending on how you want to abstract or give segregate the different user screens and the the application features to a different set of users. And we'll go over some of the cases today with a sample example as well. And this is you can find the control for this in the logic section, where once you navigate to logic in Service Studio, at the bottom you will find roles. When you expand it, you'll be able to see the anonymous and registered, and when you right click on the folder, you'll be able to add a custom role as well. Now, these roles can either be persistent or non-persistent roles. Now, persistent roles, uh, if you're using a traditional web app, then you have the option to use a persistent or a non-persistent role. A non-persistent role is only active or only available to that assigned user for that session. And once the session is ended, that role does not persist when the user logs in again. He needs to be given access again. That is a feature that's available only for traditional web. For reactive and for web apps, for reactive web apps and for mobile apps, you will see the field or the attribute, but it is not settable. It is defaulted to yes, which means any role assigned in a reactive web app or in a mobile app is committed to the database and persists through multiple logins. Now, depending on the use case, because you can add these roles, you can grant and revoke roles programmatically or through logic, you could still um, create a mechanism to have it pseudo non-persistent, where when a user logs in, you write a piece of logic that gives him or her a role, and then at the logout event, that role is revoked. So that could still be something that can be implemented since you do have programmatic access for the same. Now, when a role is assigned to a particular user, it gets committed to the database in two tables. Right? So there is a user role table when a role is assigned to a user explicitly, where you identify a user and you assign a role directly to that user. Now, roles can also be assigned to a group of users or a user group. Now, when a role is assigned to a group and a user is added to that group, that user will inherit the roles assigned to that group. This is an inherited role and is something that can be found in the table of user effective role. Now, user effective role essentially has both inherited roles as well as explicitly assigned roles. So whenever we use the check example role or the check role function that's built in for every role for a user, it will check the effective role assigned to that user. So it will check for that role, whether it's assigned implicitly or explicitly. In both cases, you will get the value back from the check role function. All right, I'm going to take a brief pause here and take a few questions if there are any. We'll try and keep it as interactive as possible. Uh, any questions so far? You can put the question in the chat. You can unmute yourself and speak. Okay. All right. So the no question. Right. So there's a question from Nani: user role and effective role. Why, and more details. So as we go and we look at the exercise, we'll see that what is the difference between a user effective role and a user role. As I explained, and I'll sort of repeat, uh, a role can be explicitly. That means you can select a user and you can assign a user a role directly, and that is an explicit assignment. So that explicit assignment is stored in the user role table. Now, if a user inherits a role because of being a part of a group, and he therefore inherits the role that is in the group role table, if you see in the screenshot here. So the group role table, that's where the role assignments to that group is put together. So think of your user effective role as as a consolidation of the roles in the group role and the user role for the user that is being checked for. So it has the data for the roles assigned to that user directly, as well as to all the groups that that user is a part of, right? So and this is very useful when you want to onboard a bunch of users. So in one of the use cases that we were working on, there are certain departments and certain designations who need to be assigned a certain set of roles. So when a user is onboarded, depending on the user designation and department, you can create a group and you can have all those users added to that group, where they would by default, as a member of that group, inherit all of those roles, thereby ensuring that you don't have to add roles individually to every user. The moment you add it to the group, it impacts all of the users in the group. All right. Can I assign the role to the screen at runtime? You cannot assign, and we'll talk about. I think when you're asking, can you assign the role to a screen? You can assign the role to a user in runtime, but you cannot restrict a screen access to a role in runtime. That is going to be a development activity which you'll have to update in Service Studio and then republish the code, which will then take effect. So it's not something that can be done in runtime. Restriction of screen access is not something that can be done in runtime. Rizwan, you have your hand raised. Hello, Rizwan, you have your hand raised. So if
Yeah.
go
Yeah,
ahead.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Yes, go
So
ahead.
my question is, first of all, good morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is related to the AD authentication. So some of the time we integrate the like user management with the AD. So how can we manage the roles by using the AD authorization?
Right. So that's an interesting question, and what we're talking about right now is user authorization. Now, you can use AD integration also. So when you integrate with, let's say, Azure AD, for example, you can also query which Azure AD groups that particular user is a part of, and you can create mirror groups in OutSystems as well. So you can use that query to identify, similar to what I said in terms of department and designation. It's a similar um, uh, attribute that can be inherited from AD, and then you can use that to assign that user to a group and thereby have those roles inherited, right? I don't know if I answered that question, but yeah, that you can use that mechanism to essentially assign roles when you are syncing with an AD to identify uh, where the user needs to fit in. Okay. All right. Please go ahead. Please do add your questions. If I'm not answering them right now, we'll get back to it at the end, and we'll go ahead and answer those questions as well. Now, next, let's look at how do we create these custom roles. So we already sort of spoke about this. Um, you can go to the Logic tab on Service Studio, right click on the roles folder, add a role, and set the name of your role and the remaining information. What is the remaining information? It's the description, and whether that role is public or not. So similar to every other attribute in the OutSystems application environment, like your server logic, like your entities, you can have the roles uh, public or not public. Now, if it is a public role, it means that it can be assigned, or you can use those server actions, the which are readily available outside of the application or outside of the module where the role is created. So typically you want to keep them public if you are creating a foundational module for all the roles, all the business roles at the foundation level, and then inheriting that across various different business applications or core services. You can then sort of have all the roles defined in one module and have them inherited by setting them as public. Description, I mean, again, this is just a best practice. It is very easy if you enter the description of what that role is supposed to be functioning for, so that when you do documentation using outdocs in OutSystems, it's automatically populated in that documentation. So and it's good. It's a good practice for documentation to use the description to explain what that role is supposed to achieve. Right? It's just good practice. All right. Role actions on the server side. So for each role that you create, you will get a check role name role activity or server action. You will get grant role name role, which will allow you to grant the role to that user, and a revoke role name role, which will allow you to revoke a role access to that particular user. Now, these are all useful for server-side assignment as well as validations of a user's role. Now, you can also do client-side validation in OutSystems for a role using the built-in JavaScript API methods, and the method is written down below. Um, you can input into the parameter and you can use the method which is your check if current user has role in bracket, where you have the dollar roles dot the role name. So in this case, what's in the screenshot would actually be example role, right? So it'll be dollar roles dot example role. And what this will allow you to do is on the client side, check the role of the user using the JavaScript API, and then implement certain role validations that you need to do on the client side. Now, client side validations provide convenience, but they are not very secure. They can be spoofed, they can be what do you call intercepted, and therefore they should always be coupled as a best practice with the server side role validations also. Especially when you're calling server side actions, they should be revalidated on the server side so that you ensure that even if the role has been spoofed on the client side, there is no data that is fetched or committed without the role validation that is applicable to that particular screen. Okay. All right. Now, how do you assign roles in the user application? So what we saw was, and we'll get to the actual application of it. But as you can see in the GIF, you can select a user, and you can, once you select the user, you can go to the roles, search for a role, add the role, and it gets added for that particular user, right? Now, you can also assign the role to a group, which you can also see in the other GIF, where you can, similar to the role you assign it, the role to the similar to the user, you assign the role to the group, and then the moment you add the user to that role, to that group, he will inherit the role, right? So now it's a little bit of your cooking show and tell, right? Okay. So let me just come out of the presentation for a quick second, and let's look at how do we do this in a sample application. So we will be demoing, we will be doing a small exercise today. I'll try to zoom in the screen so it's a little bit better visible for you guys. So I know I see a lot of participants from different parts of the world, including from Portugal and other countries. But for the purposes of this being in India and in Mumbai, we are going to look at some cricket-related examples. So if cricketers were project managers and project resources, so that's essentially where we are going to go. Okay. All right. So Saurav Ganguly was probably heading BCCI at some point. Let's make him the HR manager, right? So he gets to add resources. All right. So let's go in here and type for the role for HR, and we see HR manager there. Go ahead, add that, and boom. So now Saurav Ganguly has the role of the HR manager. All right. All right. Great. Now let's go to groups, and in groups we see a group for project managers already. In project manager, I've already gone ahead and added the project manager role. Now here, let me add the coach, Rahul Dravid, right? So let's search for Rahul here. There you go. The I forget the cred ad. What was it? Bangalore ka Gunda or whatever. But yeah, Indian coach Rahul Dravid, who won us the T20 World Cup recently. So let's go ahead and add him to the project managers group. Now, once he's added in the project managers group, and the project managers group has the project manager assigned, when we click on Rahul Dravid and we go to his information, we will see that he has the project manager role assigned to him, and then inherited from, we can see he's inherited from the project managers group, right? So these are the two ways of role assignments, implicit and explicit. Okay. Now there's another way to add roles as well. It's essentially the same aspect, but if you go to applications, you can see all of the applications and the different roles which are defined within those applications. So let's click on RBAC as an example. And okay, we see Rahul Dravid, Saurav Ganguly, and yours truly as some of the users who are assigned as a part of this application. Let's go ahead and add someone else, right? Let's go ahead and add, let's see, what were the other users we had? Okay, we had so, oops. Okay, sorry. We've got to click on the role. My mistake. We've got to click on the role, And then in that role, you can click on, you can search for the additional user, and you can assign that user, you can assign that, you can add that user to that role. So you can add a role to a user as well as you can add a user to a role. It's essentially, it's a mapping table. So you could go through both the applications route or the users route, but essentially it's an explicit assignment. It's not an implicit assignment. All right. Okay. Now let's go back to the presentation. All right. So now we know how do we assign roles within the built-in users application in OutSystems in O11. Now, how do we add the role through logic? So we already saw there are some standard server actions that are available when you create a role. So grant role, I think is fairly obvious. It allows you to give access for a role to a particular user. Now you can assign the role to both active and inactive. Now the role will persist until it is revoked. However, when you request for a check role has access, it will only return the roles for active users. It will not return the role for an inactive user because the user is inactive, and therefore that will give you a false has role attribute. The output will give you a false output. So while you can assign it to both active and inactive users, the has role will work only for active users. Okay. Um, Similarly, revoke role works for both active and inactive. But again, when you want to check whether it's implemented or not, it works. The has role will return only a boolean, a true boolean or false boolean. It isn't false by default for all inactive, and it return true only for active users if that role is assigned. All right. Now, there was a question which was asked earlier uh, with regards to can I assign the role for the screen at runtime. So you cannot do that in runtime, but yes, you can do that from Service Studio, where you select the interface, the screen from the interface tab, and there you will see all the roles that are accessible in this module. So for the roles defined in this module, it will show up. Even for the roles which are inherited through a dependency, it will show up here. And then to restrict the role, the restrict the access by the role, you can tick or untick the roles as available in the roles section. Now, here again, there's a best practice, which is to not use registered roles by default, right? So let's say your entire application landscape has 10 roles, and you want to make that screen applicable, accessible to all 10 roles. Now, one may say that, okay, if I'm giving access to all 10 roles, why not also give access to registered? Because one thing, if you remember, if you click on registered, it will automatically tick all of the roles below it as well. Right? However, it is a best practice to not assign registered roles to a screen, or the registered role to a screen, because that means the moment a user is created in the OutSystems environment, he or she will have access, that user will have access to the entire, to all the screens which have the registered roles, which is not uh, necessarily ideal. So we want to keep the role assignments and the screen design for the roles as explicit as possible, right? To have a more secure role-based access control, right? Now, Anonymous screens, I think we've already said that it's a security risk. Now, one thing that even your true change will flag as a warning, as a security warning, is if you are calling server actions from an anonymous screen. So you definitely want to avoid uh, anonymous screens to start with, and if you have an anonymous screens, you definitely want to avoid the calling of server actions from an anonymous screen. Now, role assignments also have inherently a positive reinforcement of the security policies within the OutSystems environment, within the OutSystems platform. So the aggregates which are also exposed in that screen are automatically then secured basis the roles that are being uh, given access to that particular screen. If it's anonymous, then again we lose all the protection for those entities as well, right? For the aggregates and the data in the aggregates as well. So therefore, role-based access control is the lowest but the most fundamental building block of building a very secure application uh, in our systems. All right, I'll take another pause. Um, I'll open the floor to questions if any, and if there are any questions, we'll take that and we'll move forward. Yes, Nani, you're on mute if you're speaking. Okay, I see you put a question in the chat. Is it possible to assume that if an application has 10 roles and one of the users is having 5 roles in the application, after login, the user can choose the one of the role to run the application on the specific role until the login session? So it's a good question. It's an interesting question. The way role assignments work for a user is um, the user doesn't have to select which role that he's logging in as, but the screens when the user is logged in, when he navigates to a screen, OutSystems will check which are the roles that have access to that screen, and does the user have a role that has access to the screen, and will automatically check and either give him access or bounce him off saying access, you do not have access to the screen. So there is no selection required per se, uh, and therefore uh, that's something that's handled by the platform. Now, uh, why I said it's a good question is because it also brings into account another design template or another design best practice. Now, you could add roles where it's additive in nature. Now, ideally, we don't want to assign multiple roles to a screen. You want to design a screen for a specific role. But if you are doing an AO optimization exercise, or if there is a very minimal difference between two roles for the same screen and you want to optimize and make a common screen, in that case, it's better to have the UI blocks render additively rather than reductively. So, what do I mean by additively versus reductively is that um, if if you want to display a block for a particular role, then you check if the role exists and you display the block. The reductive method is that you hide a block for a particular role. Now, if you could implement it that way also. Like, let's say for example, I don't want the financial information to be visible to a sales user, and therefore I check for a sales user role and I hide that particular block. But if there is a user who has both the roles, and that's where then the screen runs into a conflict, and you will start having misbehavior in the role-based access of that particular visual. So it's always better to to implement access role-based visualizations in an additive manner than in a subtractive manner, right? Okay, that was Nani's question. Next question is from Mansoor. Which module is the best for storing our custom roles? All right, so there is no one size fits all, but there are a couple of design patterns that we can talk about. Now, one is you create a business roles uh, foundational module, uh, and have all of the roles defined in one module, and then use them, inherit that as a dependency in all the core business logics. Or especially if one role is used across multiple applications. So let's think about something like a finance role, right? So a finance role or a support role may cut across multiple applications. So an IT admin role, or a user admin role, or a finance approver role. These are roles that may cut across multiple applications, and therefore you may want to declare these roles in a foundational module. Whereas roles which are more business logic centric, I mean, you follow the same first principles as you would for good architecture, and business any roles at the end of the day is business logic. So if it is tightly coupled with that business requirement and that business logic, it will sit in the core services module for that business logic. If it's common and used across applications, and you move it down to the foundational layer and then inherit it as a dependency. All right. So Mansoor, I hope I answered that question for you. SP, does revoke and grant role action create an entry and lock in any separate key? Yes, it does. So if we go back to the user role and the group role tables. So when you revoke a role, it will grant a role access, it will insert a record, and it will set the is active to true. When you revoke it, it will uh, mark that mapping as false. At the end of the day, it's a many to many table. It will set it as false, and it does update the user role table and the group role table whenever you grant and revoke access. All right. Okay. All right. Um, Mansoor, my question is a blank module or a service module which is good to store our custom roles. It again, I mean, it depends. You could do a blank module as well. You could do a service module as well. Ideally, you do it as a service module because service modules are essentially only for logic and data. There is no element in that, and therefore a service module would be best. Um, that would be at least that would be my recommendation. Create that as a service module. There may be some applications, and ideally we don't want to do that. We don't want to create monolithic applications. But if it's a very simple application and that role is only for that application, then it would all be in the same module as well. But yes, ideally, I would put it in a service module. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Great. All right. Let's go to the next scene, and there's the exercise. Now, let's come out of the uh, PPT again, and let's go to the example. So we added access to the two users, right? To Saurav Ganguly and Rahul Dravid. So in this application that you see on the screen, we basically created a very simple application with three entities: a table of projects with project names, a table of resources, and a table of which has a project to resource mapping. So which resources are mapped to which projects, because you could have one resource as a part of multiple projects. And talking about the cricket team, yeah, you can have Hardik Pandya play in multiple tournaments, right? So for this exercise, a project is going to be a tournament, and resources are going to be cricketers. Okay, all right. So um, we go to the logic tab, and then there we can find the roles. And when you right click on the role, you will have the option to add a role, add a folder, or inherit roles from another foundational layer module as well. Now, once you've added a role, then as you can see, you will have the check role, the grant role, and the revoke role. Now, remember we spoke about adding client-side validations as well as server-side validations, right? Now, let's look at how do we check for server-side validations. So a project can only be created and should be created only by a project manager, right? So when the server action is called, we can check for the project manager. We can pass the get user ID in the user ID input. When the server action executes, you will get the output in has role attribute. You check if the role is applicable, and then you move forward and you go through your server action process. If the role is not valid, or the user does not have that role, in this case we're just passing a message to the front end, but you could pass an exception so that it gets logged in your error log as well. And you can also you can either just log it, or you can even if it's a part of a multi-step transaction, then you can even roll back that transaction, right? So you could raise an exception and then handle the exception as well. Similarly, resources can only be created by by an HR manager. So similarly, you check for the HR role, you pass the user ID there, you check if that user has the role, and then you go ahead and you commit the change, you make the update, or you raise the exception or send the information back to the user. Now, in the resources, you will find there's a self for user access control. This is a part of that exercise. I have modified it slightly for this purpose, but yeah, uh, more or less what we are doing here is what will help you with that exercise as well. Going forward, when you are going to be attending the other sessions also, um, uh, please do ensure that you have your personal environment up and running, because I would like to give you guys some time, maybe 15-20 minutes, to try out what we are doing during the session itself, and therefore when you're doing it, when you get any questions, ask and get those queries resolved. Okay. All right. So you can use so this is how you can use the check HR manager role as well, right? Now, similarly, if you were to grant access to a role, and I say we create a new screen for users, and the HR manager wants to uh, we want to give HR manager the access to be able to administer a role, then what we need to do is, whichever is the user, in this case, if it is Saurav Ganguly, then we need to go and give Saurav Ganguly access to the user manager role as well. Now, the user manager role, uh, yeah, user manager role is a role within the users module, which will then allow that user, that login, to be able to assign roles and create new users and assign roles to a user into a user group. So once you assign that, then that particular user can also trigger server actions which can grant roles to the end user in runtime as a part of the logic. Okay. All right. Now this is at the back end. Now at the front end, what do we do? So at the front end, we've got all these different screens, right? So we've got the project resource, we've got the project detail, we've got the project resources. Is my screen visible to everyone? Would you want me to sort of zoom in a little bit?
No, it is visible.
Okay, all right. So if you look at the resource list, uh, access the resource list. The resource detail is only for the HR. Projects is only for the project manager. Project resources, as an example here, because I want to show you front end validations, I've kept it accessible both to the HR manager as well as the project manager. The project detail is only visible to the project manager at this point. And then the add project resource, again, I've made it accessible to both an HR manager and a project manager, which is again to show you how do you implement conditional front end validations and how do you supplement it with a backend validation. All right. Okay. Now,
Metformin.
sorry. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and see whether what we've implemented works. Right. So let's open the application and let's log in first as Saurabh. Okay. And so we see this is a landing screen which is accessible by both, so it is visible to both. But if he goes to projects, then the user will get kicked out because Saurabh Ganguly does not have access to the project server, right? And therefore he does not have access to that screen. So we can go back. Now we can go to the resources tab. Now in the resources, you've got all of these various resources, right? Now let's go ahead and add another resource. Let's put, who do we add? Let's put KL Rahul, right? Right? Now, when I add that, gets added to the resource because both front-end validation and back-end validations have been satisfied. Now, let's go to project resources. In project resources, the screen is accessible to both. But what did we see in our implementation? We gave access to both, but in the server side, we ensured that the validation that the new resource could be added to a project only by the project manager, not by the HR manager. So let's say for the upcoming Asia Cup, I want to add KL Rahul as well. So Saurabh Ganguly says, I want KL Rahul on the team. I don't care what you do, Rahul Dravid. I want KL Rahul on the team. Rahul Dravid says, no, I'm not doing that. So Saurabh Ganguly logs in, tries to add the resource on his own. He says, I'm the head of BCC. I don't care what you say. I'm going to add him. But then, guys like you and me, we've got Rahul Dravid's back, right? We've got his back. So we put in that server side logic. We put in that server side validation. Let's see if it works. So let's add KL Rahul here. Let's try adding him. Oops. User does not have access. So he tried. The client side allowed him, but the server side did not. So in that sense, we know that server side validation works. So this would be the case where ideally we don't want to do this, but this is also to demonstrate and validate that if your server side role is compromised for whatever reason, is intercepted or spoofed, your client side role is spoofed or intercepted, the server side validation will ensure that that particular user is thrown out and does not have access to that particular server action, right? Okay, but now this creates unnecessary tension between Saurav Ganguly and Rahul Dravid. So we don't want that. Both are good guys. I mean, I like both of them. So let's go ahead and ensure that Saurav Ganguly does not see the option at all, right? He should not even see the option to be able to add a project resource. So let's go back into the application. Now here let's go to the project resources screen. In that screen, now for a particular widget, now there are three things that we can do. When I select that button, there are three different ways I can implement this. I can either disable it, I can hide it, or I can encapsulate it in an if. The most secure, the best practice is to encapsulate it in an if. The reason for that is, again, if it is enabled or disabled, it can be circumvented in the front end. If it is hidden, it can still be circumvented in the front end. But if it is looped or if it is nested in an if, then the resource itself does not load and therefore the APIs are not accessible on the front end, because you check for the role when your application is ready before it is rendered. So I've already gone ahead and put in the JavaScript for the same, and we'll show you that. So in project resources for the on-ready event, we go ahead and configure. We put in the JavaScript here, where we essentially define a parameter of project manager. We check if that role has project manager access, and then it will return and will store that is project manager here, which is then stored as a part of the output and in the local variable here. And then basis that local variable, we can then conditionally render uh, load that particular widget. Right? So in this case, let's go ahead and change this condition from true to is project manager. Right. So let's go ahead and publish that now. And once it's published, when I refresh the screen with Saurav Ganguly's login, I should no longer be able to see that widget at all, and therefore I will not be able to create that. Right. Okay. So while this is publishing, there's another question. Is it a best practice to assign more than one role for single users? Yes. Not so much so as a best practice, but most of your business needs will require that one user has one or more roles assigned to him. The roles are meant to be as granular as possible so that you can have a combination of roles, giving you the flexibility to provide to turn on and off access to certain screens. So yes, you want to keep your roles very granular to the smallest business action that is required for that specific role, and then accordingly add multiple roles uh, if a person needs access. So, for example, one example would be that an employee will have an employee role, right? So he can go to a leave calendar and can apply for role. His manager can also apply for a leave, so therefore the manager is also an employee, therefore he will also have an employee role. But the manager will also have a manager role, which will allow him to approve leaves for his reportees, which the employee will not have, since that employee is not a manager. So the reportee and a manager. So the manager will have both roles, whereas the reportee will have only one role, right? So Mansoor, I hope I answer that question. And thank you guys for keeping this as interactive as possible. The more questions you ask, the more we all learn. Definitely appreciate all of the interaction and all of the questions being asked. Great job. All right, so now the application is loaded. Now let's go ahead and reload this page, and we should not be able to see that widget anymore. There we go. Now everything is good between Dada and Rahul Dravid. The wall and Dada are now friends again, and there's world peace and world hunger has been solved. Well, probably not that big, but yeah, at least as far as our demonstration is concerned, the demonstration is done. So, all right. We'll take a quick stop for another bunch of questions, and then we'll move ahead to the next part of the presentation. Any more questions? All right. Okay. Now, what are the best practices and recommendations for RBAC implementation? Avoid disabling and hiding actions from the UI. So we just went through that. It's best to nest it or um, put it in an if condition. That way, conditionally loads instead of being hidden or disabled. Avoid preparing validations, performing validations only in preparation on the rendering on the client side. Do it on the server side as well. Implement a page for a specific role. Avoid anonymous screens. Avoid screens with registered user access. Check for the permissions in the action in the server side as well. Ensure role validations is done both on the client side and server side. Use non-guessable IDs. Now, I think this is an interesting thing, which is, I mean, we saw, right? It's user.admin as a role. So again, the reason why we do, or user manager role, the reason we don't want to do that because it's easy to manage. So if someone is trying to spoof a role, then by just trying the more random guessable roles, he or she will be able to try and spoof the role. So we want to try and avoid that just as another layer of protection. And I'm sorry, I meant to add that here, but field level access, sorry, and this will get updated in the slide will get sent out, but field level access is something that OutSystems does not offer out of the box as of now. But you can implement field level access by putting a user ID attribute in the record, or putting a group ID in the record, and ensuring that that particular, by checking for validations during the aggregate rendering, or when the aggregate is fetched, by checking if that particular user has access to that record at in that aggregate at the field level. So field level access is not available out of the box, but it's definitely something that you can implement, both when you're calling aggregates on the client side, as well as during in your get actions, as well as in your server side actions, to check if that user has access to that record to be able to update it or modify it or read it. But that's something that has to be implemented. It's not readily available out of the box. All right. These are a bunch of links. Again, it'll be a part of the presentation package that'll be sent out. How does OutSystems help you address the top 10 vulnerabilities? You can find more information on this on the OutSystems documentations page. There is the role-based security training, which is very, very useful. It has the same exercise that you can do and go through it. Strongly recommend everyone going through this if they've not already done it. Protecting OutSystem apps from access control and permission vulnerabilities. There's an OutSystem support documentation, gives you a little bit more granular detail in terms of what are the other things that you can do as far as access role control is concerned, including field level access. So they do have certain design templates that tell you how to build and where to build that logic. So ideally, every field level access logic should be written in the business core services for that particular application. It should be in the core services module. Um, um, the security, so this link is for the all your JavaScript APIs, including that for security, where you can, so OutSystems has a lot of built-in JavaScript APIs for checking, getting your device information for a mobile device, for checking your HTTPS request source, for your checking your user role. For all client-side activities, you have a lot of built-in JavaScript APIs that you can leverage. I strongly recommend that you go ahead and uh, read that documentation and get yourself updated on that. And then there is the user roles documentation in the O11 documentation, which will give you a lot more detail in terms of how the roles are created, how the roles are assigned, how do you do validations. You'll get some design, what do you call, templates there as well, and you can utilize that as well. All right. Another question: is there any demo or example where JavaScript API is not good for checking role? So there isn't. I don't know if there's any ready-made demo per se, but I'm sure if you and I'll do a search as well, Mansoor. It's a good question. I'll see if I can find any literature around uh, how you can do a vulnerability and penetration test and bypass the JavaScript check role. But yeah, I know it is possible, but I don't have um, documentation or a resource for that. But I will try and get that and share it with the group, possibly in the next meeting, or I'll send it out in the blast, in the email blast. Okay, all right. Now, most of you guys are hanging around for the quiz. I know that because I recognize a bunch of people here who are quiz champions from various OutSystem user group events. So, are we ready for the quiz? Thumbs up if we are. Either way, you're doing the quiz. So, here we go. All right. Let me bring up the quiz. All right. Let's load that. Give it a couple of seconds. Okay. All right. So, let's start the quiz. Scan the QR code or go to slido.com, put in the number, and let's get this party started. Okay. 15 who have joined. I see 27 participants. Is are you guys facing any issues joining the quiz? Nani, just go to slido.com, open that. You should be able to put in the number and join. C16. All right, we are waiting for the 7 more guys or girls to join. All right, guys, you got a couple of more minutes before we start the quiz. If there's anyone who's not able to join the quiz, just ping me in the chat or DM me, and I'll try and see if I can help you. Okay. I think we have one. Shall we start? Okay. We'll start the quiz. What's your first question? Wow, good 82%, huh? Man, you guys were really paying attention there. All right. Very close competition too. We got 6 seconds, 7 and 8, 8 seconds. Great. There we go. 75% of you guys got it right. Man, you guys are awesome. Wow, that's very close competition there. All right. More varied answers, but yeah. So role-based access control is a user authorization. It's used for user authorization. So it's not used for authentication, and therefore first and third are wrong. But yeah, this was a tricky question. All right. Now we're starting to see some gap. But yeah, I mean, second, third, fourth is still tightly fought. Wow, 95% of you guys got it right. That's just fantastic. That is fantastic. All right. Wow, this is split. Almost three-way split. Okay, there you go. Yeah. Your check role action will always check for the effective role. So irrespective of whether it is inherited or explicitly assigned, that's what it's going to check. That is what it's going to return. Fantastic. All right. Wow. Another major 84% all of you guys getting it right. So you guys are really paying attention, man. That's fantastic. All right. Consistent performance from the team. Great. Fantastic. Fantastic. Wow, that's a surge from Avinash there. Wow. And even Nani, man. Yeah. A lot of movement in the third, fourth, and fifth rows. Nice. Remember, is which option is false? Man, you guys are fantastic. 100% record on the last question. All right, now drum roll. Are we ready to see the final winners? Well, congratulations, Amal. 9 on 9 and in record time. Fantastic. Ashfaq, good job there. Mansoor, good job. A lot of questions from Mansoor as well. Mayur, well done. And Nani, well done. All right, congratulations to all of you guys. Fantastic job. Absolutely fantastic. All right, let me just take a quick screenshot of this. Absolutely fantastic job, guys. Absolutely fantastic. All right. Okay. Now let's head to the last two slides, and then we can take a few more questions. So you can find my contact info, scan the QR code to connect with me on LinkedIn, scan the QR code to join us on the Outsystems User Group for Mumbai. We also have a WhatsApp group. Scan that and join the user group there as well. And we'll looking forward to connect with you guys on all the three platforms. And if there are any more questions, I'm happy to take those questions now. Any suggestions on how this session went? What would you guys want to see differently in the next session? We're going to have these sessions every alternate Saturdays, and I look forward to having all of you guys continue through the entire masterclass event. It's been a fantastic event, a great opening event. I mean, a round of claps to all of you guys. Beautifully done. A lot of good interaction, a lot of great questions, and fantastic quiz participation. Thank you once again for giving me your time. It has been absolutely fantastic. All right, guys. I'm going to leave this on the screen for a few more minutes. If you guys want to stay back and ask questions, I'm happy to be here and answer those questions. All right. Thank you, guys. And see you guys. Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. I think Oliveria. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Yeah, there was an AM PM confusion. I'm sorry, but we will put this recording out for the team. Yes, definitely, we will share the presentation. Um, if you want to just DM me your email ID, I'll have that. I'll have it sent out to you, and I'll also see how we can have the presentation and the video circulated to all of you guys as well. Great, great. I will do that. Thank you. Thank you, Avinash. It was great having you guys on the call as well. Bye, Nani. Thank you. Thank you, guys. All right. All right. It's been great. See you guys in 2 weeks. Till then, this is Subbu signing off. Bye bye.